For reference, I played Origins in 2010 and played Dragonage 2 in its release date during its release, and I just got around Inquisition in this year only. Then circled back to Origins and 2 again in the last 2 or 3 months ago. So this trilogy is very much fresh in my mind, and a lot of my critique will be coming through from that place only. It is easier to start with the 2's limitation because they are unavoidable in both the game design as well as the discussion surrounding it. The game was made under a year, like 16 months or so, and I suspect its budget was also rather tight. The design philosophy of the game is well aware of this and is built to avoid it. Whereas in Origins, like most RPGs, a vast expanse of 2 is just city. Origin took place in the kingdom of Ferelden and had a slew of major areas like Ostagar, Kokari, Bracalian Forest, Redcliffe, Denerim, Havens, Deep Woods, and the Fade. 2, on the other hand, in just six areas within the city of Kirkwall and the Southern Mount and Wounded Coast and Bonefit. Some of the locations aren't even relevant in portion of the game. Essentially, the 2 couldn't have achieved the breadth that is expected of an RPG, so they attempt to make up for it by having a bit of a depth, like a small scale but one that is explored much more thoroughly. Furthermore, a lot of questing happens consistently at the same location within the game. This makes the game a lot more boring and dull because you are seeing the same settlements for the next 30 or 40 hours. The game tries to narratively help it to make sense by having an incident taking place there be related, or it is transparently clear that they were pressed for time and they had to settle for having handful of set of dungeons and evolving encounters at course and evolving quests and encounters over the course of the game. DA2 kept the scale small from the get-go to accommodate that limitations. The location were far from the only things that suffer. The smaller location of the dungeons and the world means that there's more opportunity for tedium. This was somewhat solved by making each encounter of having 2 waves of enemies. This meant that the battles were longer and hopefully more intense. I personally hated that change. It makes the combat even more dull and repetitive than it already is. It is evidently clear that even BioWare hated the repetition because there were 2 distinct bosses that were repeated twice. One is a dragon, another one is a Vartarial. Each appears in 2 distinct acts and the party members comment on it. Don't we just kill this thing or something of that nature? Like they were self-aware that it is not a finished game and they are repeating a lot of assets and enemies throughout the course of the game. But considering the hellish development of the game, this is self-deprecating. A drunkard in the Hanged Man pub can be found providing meta-commentary about how you are all in a story. He also bemoans doesn't everything feel simpler and goes on to some detail I can't recall. The point is, BioWare were aware of these issues and they hated it. These self-deprecating jokes litters throughout the game. There were even fewer ambient dialogue that unnamed NPCs do to each other. In Origins, you could approach people and get a response, and if you didn't, they would be chatting among themselves. But in 2, this was far less common. You cannot go and engage with any NPCs that isn't a story character or a merchant or a quest giver. There is couple of exceptions, but this is how it is for the most part. The ambient dialogue is great, but it is so infrequent that it is pity, because even the little that was there added so much. And again, speaking of self-deprecating meta-humor, there is a worker among Blooming Rose who remarks about how he had the same haircut for 7 years and it has never changed. It is yet another jab at Dragonage 2 by BioWare themselves. I assumed if they had proper time and effort, they would have had characters and locations be visibly impacted by the events in the game. Itemization and combat have been dumbed down. You can no longer equip armors on your companions. Instead, have to buy or loot 4 or so upgrades for each throughout the game. Apparently, someone at EA thought that we were too dumb to figure out what armor works on who in the game, so the choice is gone. Thankfully, you can still equip the rest of the companion items just fine, which is nice. The combat feels lot better to handle, and it isn't just a dice rolling out in 3D animations. The downside is that combat felt a lot simpler. Fewer interactions, fewer combos, smaller variety, etc. There are some good stagger, brittle or disorienting interactions, but nothing as in-depth as Origins, unfortunately. This doesn't mean that it is not fun. It is still loads of fun. It just means that it is a thing that will put a lot of people off from this game. So, what does the game does right? Well, a lot of DA2 has, without a doubt, some incredibly stark shortcomings, but they were more than enough to make up for it by the writing within the game. Because they had to stick to few locations, the team decided they are just going to go really in depth with city over time. As a result, the game explores the drastic changes within the city of Kirkwall over the periods of 7 years. This method of storytelling pays off really well until the last moment, like the final third of the game, where it has a major slip up. Kirkwall itself feels like a living, breathing entity, even though the city itself, the construction of the city itself is nonsense, like it's all spikes. There are no houses in the game. The story follows a group of Dragonage Origins Lothering who fled after the Ostagar. You are given the character of Hawk, who despite of being a pre-made character like akin to Shepard from Mass Effect, never feels at a loss of choice, agency or expressions. You follow the story over the 7 years from being sold into a slavery to actually getting somewhere in life. People in your life, both family and companions, evolve on their own journey over the course of the years. Honest, in terms of companions, honestly, they are some of the best part of the game. The meaningful companions in Dragon Age Origins are Alistair, Liliana, and Morgan. All are good in my opinion, but some of the companions like Ogrin or other like Sten are tolerable at best and uninteresting at worst. Even within Origins DLC, there's only Anders that are particularly of note, or maybe Velana and Sequent of additional note. But companions in Dragonage 2 are almost all great across the board. There is no one that is boring or largely forgettable. The companions in 2 are all incredibly fleshed out in their own way. They come from their own background and will listen to your influence but push back with their own ideas on you. Even the siblings that becomes your companion, different one dies depending on the prologue, depending on your class, isn't and one don't yes man. They are all fleshed out, plausible people and their interaction will make them feel consistently compelling. The companion will challenge your belief and even in key decisions try to influence your decision making or challenge your own philosophy. Your role playing choices with them get much more interesting because you're not trying to merely pass a skill checks to convince them, but you're trying to leverage their own experience to make an argument. It makes you interested in their journey and will have you feeling a certain way, whether it's loyalty, hostility, or anything else. They do explicit emotions. There is an approval meter that goes from friendship to rivalry, but the best part is that both ends of the spectrum are great. A lot of RPG encourage you to be a sycophant or a people's pleaser because the game punishes you for disappointing your companions. Those games remove interesting options, dialogues, and opportunity and romances. But Dragon Age 2 has none of that. Both friendship and rivalry have their own distinct interaction that will influence your decision that the companion makes. Just like you get a new dialogue for being a friend, you also get a new dialogue for being a rival. The game rewards you for actually role playing, not for min maxing out everyone's companion meter. So that's a huge plus towards the game. Additionally, the companion receives a different buffs depending on whether they are your friend or rival. A lot of these are thematically makes far more sense, which is a nice touch. The story itself, the main plot of the game, can only be described as the story of Kirkwa. I know there is a bit of a reductionist, but I compare it to how Wire was described as the story of Baltimore. Dragon Age 2 essentially uses Kirkwall involving circumstances to explore issues related to magic within the Thedas. The question regarding role and belief of the Chantry, the Templars, the Circle, the Tevinter Imperium were explored. A lot of religious and socio-political overlaps are also explored using those such as Andraste and the Maker's view on magic, the Kunari's understanding of belongings and how it pertains to magic, and Tevinter's use of magic as a political tool. Two spends a lot of time This game spends a lot of time exploring how ideologies are not monolithic and there's always more along the between the lines than people want to believe. Whether this is about Chantry, Kunari, or the Blood Mages. The game also has a deep focus on how seemingly irrelevant individuals can often irreversibly turn the tide of the game. How this game also has a deep focus on how seemingly irrelevant individual can often irreversibly turn the tide of the events. Although it doesn't matter at the end because no matter what choice you make, Chantry or Templar, the end will always be the same. So it is a bit railroady on the third act of the game, which is conversely the weakest part of the game. In case I haven't spelled it out clearly, the story is incredible but somewhat lacking at the same time. A lot of the companion subplot weave neatly to the game, which actually makes sense with the main plot. Usually, the story revolves around the protagonist, but here your companions are people of great import themselves, whom you met over the long period of time. They play into the story just as much and often drags you kicking and screaming into it. It is a welcome change from RPGs where the entire universe revolved around one man. And yes, yeah, in terms of combat, I said that the combat was streamlined earlier, and I stand by it. That said, it is still a good fun. The attack animations fully feel like they mean something. Both Origins and Witcher 1 threw me off because of this, because I don't want to see dice roll play out in 3D. These games' fights are massive and longer, which is somewhat of a negative for me. I am having fun with the combat as is, but I will say though it doesn't need to be that much longer. It needs to be much more varied. And in this case, the combat is very, very repetitive. There's only two fights in the entire game, I would say though, are unbalanced in my opinion. One was the second time I fought the dragon, which is weird because it was such a breeze for the first time. They just increases the damage and the HP of that boss. I played this game with all the DLC, and there's only three of significance: the Exiled Prince, the Legacy, and the Mark of Assassins. They're all really great, with some minor qualms here and there. The Exiled Prince is just a new companion, Sebastian, and he has his own dialogue quest and whatnot. But honestly, he should have been in the main game to begin with. But at least this isn't a Mass Effect 3 type Javik sorts of situation.